Sorry, Daniel. Yeah, I just didn't get a chance to change after trial today. So.
College football nerds, y'all know we're going to talk Ohio State and Penn State this week. I'm going to try, Josh is with me, Pirate Josh. I'm going to try to not go on a rant about Big Noon Saturday. I feel like it's unfair that the home team doesn't get to fully embrace all of the alcoholic beverages and get wild and rowdy. I think it's a fact. It's a proven fact. Night games are louder. It's not fair. The end. I started with a rant. Okay, whatever. We're going to get nerdy with y'all. We got some interesting numbers to talk about in this game. We got some interesting talking points to talk about this game. And, of course, we're going to bring out the model. We're going to see what it thinks. We're going to talk about this a little bit. Josh, for me, I think there's a really interesting talking point. Caveat all of this. We don't know if Drew Allar is going to play. We're recording this before it's been announced. Anything other than game time decision. Vegas has got this one pretty tight, Josh. It's like a 3.5 point favorite for Ohio State. They're going on the road. Lots of weird stuff can happen in our Beaver Stadium that might be a little subdued for Big Noon Saturday. But I'm looking at who these two teams have played. And I've thinking through watching them all year. Josh, Penn State has not played anybody that can play offensive football. And Ohio State hasn't really played any good defenses other than Oregon, and they lost it. So Ohio State hasn't beaten anybody that's got a great defense, and Penn State hasn't played anybody that's got a good offense. There's an opportunity here for one of these teams to be exposed and shocked by the lack of playing either good defense or good offense.
I mean, that's just sort of the reality of the situation for these two teams. I mean, when you look at Penn State in terms of overall offenses, and you can go to collegefootballnerds.com and you can go play with our model. You can look at our statistics, and we generate this versus expected ranking, meaning it's just purely opponent-adjusted versions of all the stat rankings as a percentage. And what we found is, in terms of scoring offense, the two best offenses that Penn State have played opponent adjusted are 19th USC and 50th, that being West Virginia Mountaineers. So, like, to your point, though, when you flip it around and you say, okay, well, what's expected on the other side? Defensively, Oregon is a really great defense that Ohio State's played. But then when you throw that out and you scroll down, Nebraska is at least 18th. So I will say that there have been some more meaningful games, I guess, or at least a couple real tests for Ohio State that maybe Penn State hasn't had to the same degree. Nebraska is a better defense than USC is an offense. Oregon is just a better team on overall than anything Penn State's played in. There's not really anything close. And now I know Ohio State lost that. But as we were discussing before, if Oregon right now is 6th best defense in our system, 16th best offense, that's a game that Ohio State lost close, but still scored in the 30s, gave up in the 30s. Penn State, when they played USC, that was a game in the 30s, but USC's defense isn't anything like Oregon's. And so what you get from a total result from that is it suggests that Ohio State is a good bit better. Now let me say something that is going to be really controversial. I'll say it right off the bat, and I'll let you respond. A lot is going to be made out of Drew Allar being a game time decision. And as a game time decision, it probably means that we won't really know the answer on whether he's going to play. Obviously not in time for us to do a recording. Not much we can do about that. But probably won't even really know for anybody from a pundit's perspective. Daniel, you and I are not super high on Drew Allar. Is that true? Like, we think he's okay.
That is true.
Now, I will admit, I thought he played pretty well at the outside of this game. I thought he was playing pretty well. I think he's played pretty well through the season. I don't think he's a bad quarterback, okay? And I think people take it that way. I just don't think he's overly good. We have this like nerd performance index thing, again, on our website where we take a lot of our opponent-adjusted stats. We rank quarterbacks. We have Drew Allar 16th, a little bit behind Draxon Dart. Pavia sitting there at 11th. Rourke was at 10th. That's a good quarterback. It's not a phenomenal quarterback, right? And I think that's probably fair for what Allar is this season. My thing, Daniel, I thought Prabula looked really, really stinking good. It took him half a quarter to a quarter to get adjust to the game, which every new quarterback does. He ended the game 11 of 13, only 98 yards, but at 7.5 per with a touchdown. Drew Allar was 14 of 18, which was very impressive, but that's only 8.2 yards per with a touchdown. QBR I find really fascinating. So QBR often gets confused with quarterback rating, and if you didn't know this, those are different stats. I hate ESPN for the way they did this. QBR is ESPN's proprietary stat that's based on EPA, which is estimated points added. That looks at the value of every play you do on the field and how many points that gives, supposedly to the offense in terms of scoring potential. And that is passing and running. So the rushes from Prabula are taken into account. That's the same reason why Jalen Milroe at Alabama is always so high in QBR, because it includes his rushing statistics. I personally feel like they're really overvalued in QBR. Rant for a different day. But Prabula's QBR was 85, which is quite good. Drew Allar's was only 53.7, which is pretty darn low. It's actually lower than Locke's was at 54. Now, Locke was 5.2 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a QBR of 54, higher than Allar. And what that really says, Daniel, is just how much Allar is getting yardage on first down, second down, like a lot of comeback throws and things where he can use his big arm in the middle of the field. And EPA really values plays in the short field. It devalues sacks. It values being able to run the ball a little bit, all that kind of stuff. Allar is wasn't really a particularly effective, efficient quarterback on plays that really matter. Conversion opportunities, scoring opportunities. Those were the plays where he wasn't making the biggest impact, which is the thing that hurts you the most. Now, I know like the USC game, he was an absolute gamer in the fourth quarter. I get it. But I'm telling you, again, we try to back this up with stats, so it's not just a blind statement. Allar's QBR was quite low in that game. And, when you look at, like Will Howard in the Nebraska game, QBR is 74, right? Prabula 85 was higher than Howard was at 13.8 yards per attempt and 3 touchdowns in that game. Daniel, I think Prabula being in as the starting quarterback for Penn State. Now, they get a game of film. We always say that usually that second game is often harder. When you have a good amount of film to study it for a quarterback, you tend to be more prepared. Texas A&M is probably going to run in the same thing with Reed, I bet, when people are more prepared for him to be the starter. I don't know that it's a downside, Daniel. And I know, if you're a Penn State fan, you take exception to dissing Allar. I thought Prabula looked so good that my personal opinion is as good as he looked. I think Prabula may really prove out why we've been skeptical of Allar, because I think this offense is capable, especially with their run game being as really good as it is, of taking that offense to a somewhat more effective, more efficient level in a way that they really haven't been able to do today.
Before I looked at our number, our nerd performance index for QB ratings is kind of like our own QBR, QB rating that we do. And in my mind, as you were talking through it, I was like, to me, Drew Allar is not a bad quarterback, but he's Graham Mertz. And who is right behind Drew Allar in our numbers? That's before I saw it. It's Graham Mertz. And I think that's fair. I think that, the problem with Drew Allar is not who he is. It's who he was rated to be coming out of high school and what the expectations were. I don't think in general, I don't think he's a bad quarterback either. I just think he has lived off of that rating, and I think Penn State fans' mind more than anything else, and they keep waiting for it to click, and it still might. I'm not saying it won't. I just think maybe for this game and for who he's been so far, he might be Will Howard, which I think is an apt comparison. The only counter I would give you there is it's also something to have your first start be against Ohio State. There's a little bit of a it's something to come in against Wisconsin where you're going to win that game and then have to come in and play Ohio State. I do think it's also tough that Ohio State has to play number 1 Oregon and number 3 Penn State on the road. It's funny though, because if you were an Ohio State fan looking at the schedule at the beginning of the season, you weren't thinking, man, I'm so glad we've got Indiana at home, but it might turn out to be a pretty important thing that falls their way. Josh, the Nebraska game, you talked about Nebraska being the one other than Oregon good defense, and I do think it's fair the point you made that look, Penn State. It's fair to point out that they gave up 30 to USC, but USC's defense is pretty good. They gave up 30, but USC's offense is a good offense, or has been to this point this year. Nebraska, it's tough. So Oregon, I think it's great. 31 points against a good defense. You gave up 32. I actually don't think that's the end of the world to give up 32 to Oregon. Nebraska's a different story. Speaking of Indiana beat them the week before 56-7. I'm not doing the transitive property thing. I wouldn't pick Indiana to beat Ohio State. But something happened in that game. Some kind of hangover from the Oregon game, or something wasn't clicking right. That game was weird. But Josh, if you go back and remember the first half of the Iowa game, I think it was 7-0 at the half or something like that. It kind of felt like that, but it was a whole game. So my question is, who is Ohio State? Is it the team we saw in the second half of Iowa and then we saw go toe-to-toe with Oregon? Because to me, I took more good away from that game than bad. Or are they the team that struggled first half with Iowa and really struggled a whole game with Nebraska?
Well, if you've followed our channel through the year, you'd know that I kind of view it as something of both, right? The statement that I made from the beginning of the year is I felt like when Ohio State got the ball outside the box, offensively, they were really effective. And the challenge for them is getting the ball out of the box. I took a lot of heat for that, the same way I took heat for the beginning of the year, toying with the idea of whether I wanted to have Oregon ranked ahead of Ohio State, which people said was insane. Look, I make these statements because they're the statements I believe. Sometimes I'm way off and wrong. Hopefully I gain some credibility with you guys when I say these things and they turn out to have some merit, even when everyone thinks it's laughable, right? Because I'm trying to tell you the honest takes I have, and I'd get a lot more viewers, as would Daniel, and if we didn't. And, if you're hung around and you like that, this is your opportunity to hit like and subscribe and follow our channel and give us a little bit of grace when we're wrong early on, because we're either going to adjust or, maybe we have a point that other people haven't picked up on yet. My thing with Ohio State, I don't know what it is about their offense, Daniel. They just struggle to make the play happen, is the way I would say it. Like, their players, Henderson, Judkins, Smith, Egbuka, Tate, are so explosive in space. But they have such a hard time, and they're so janky getting them the ball in space to start with. And that whole offense with Day, I feel like right now, and especially with Howard as a quarterback, it's like they are just constantly trying to get to the point of getting the ball out there. And if they can get it, if they can get the play to run and get the ball where they want it to be, the odds of them having an explosive are the highest in the country. But when they get in these games against better defenses, Daniel, I feel like they can go a long time without ever having that happen. And it just makes for a really inconsistent performance where, again, Will Howard was 13.8 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns in this game, and they scored 21 points. And part of it, Daniel, I think, is the fact that they don't really have a running game between the tackles. I know we were talking about that live. I mean, Judkins 2.9 yards per carry. Henderson was 2.5. Howard 1.8. Like, they could not. And when I talk about getting it out of the box, I think one of the biggest things I note is the backs navigating within a crowded box are not terribly good. Henderson has never been a power runner. Judkins was brought in for that. I've always maintained that I thought Henderson was a better back probably overall than Judkins. I think Judkins does some stuff really well. He's probably more powerful, but neither one of those guys is really just like overpowering teams at the line of scrimmage, nor is their offensive line getting a tremendous amount of push to have crazy yardage on the ground against better defenses. And so I think that kind of causes things to stall. I mean, you end up with more long down and distance. That spread offense stuff they run, it's been very boom or bust, I think, for them. And you end up in these situations where you don't score a ton of points, right? And look, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that from a stats perspective. But one big one, right? 1 of 10 on third down in that game with Nebraska. When they got to third down, they did a really poor job. And it's crazy to be 1 of 10 on third down and 13 of 16 passing in the same game. And that, again, Daniel, speaks to the fact that they really struggle on those plays getting to the point of explosion. And I think when they do, they tend to be scoring opportunities. But a lot of those plays get stopped short. And when you look at the overall averages offensively, they look fantastic, but they have, a 40-yard long pass, a 60-yard long pass. Half their passing yardage came on really 3 plays in that game. And that's a recipe for really inconsistent scoring. I mean, simply put, that's just what it is.
I think that if we're going to talk about something in Ohio State's favor, Simmons being out, the first game really with him being out, I think there's a lot to figure out on that offensive line that will be better in the second game without him. I don't think they're going to replace him totally, and they're going to feel it for the rest of the year, but I think you're going to see great improvements from game 1 without him to game 2 without him. The other thing is these clock rules and how the game can be played now. Ohio State saw a little bit of what Nebraska, or what a little bit of Alabama saw at Vanderbilt, in that Nebraska was willing to play the short game and absolutely melt the clock and hold the ball. Ohio State only had 46 plays. That's nothing. 13 of 16 passing, but only 16 attempts, right? I think that some of that, what we're seeing with a lot of these teams that are much better than the teams they're playing, is a couple of things don't go your way on a couple of consecutive drives. And even if you don't give up points on the other side of the ball, if they can hold the ball for a couple of drives and then that middle 8 gets a little weird in terms of when you get the ball, if it's a shortened drive because you don't have time, you have to take a knee and go to the half and whatever, you can wake up in mid-third quarter and have not had that many legitimate scoring opportunities, whereas years past, you would be up a couple of scores because you would have had more time, you'd have scored in the first half, you'd have been able to put some pressure on them. And I think that's a little bit of what happened here. Ohio State is a much better team than Nebraska. Nebraska is not a very good team at all. And I'm not upset, if I'm an Ohio State fan, about the 17 that I gave up. But I am a little concerned about the 21 because Penn State does have a better defense. So saying all of that, Josh, if there is some carryover issues with this offensive line, to me there's an opportunity that this game is played. You mentioned when you first looked at the point spread and the over-under that it was low. This game could potentially play sub-20s. What's that game look like if that happens?
Well, and that's where I think Penn State's big strength is, because they have ran the ball exceedingly well. I mean, when you talk strengths like team for team, the thing that really defines Penn State, and I'm pulling it up right now in the better way that we have to do it, is their run game offensively. And right now, opponent adjusted, we only have them 39th. We actually have them 5th in yards per attempt, which is opponent adjusted, which is interesting. 5th in yard per attempt defense, 35th in rush defense. But they are consistent running the ball. And that's hard to do. And I think in recent years, they haven't always been great at that. And that's been one of the things that's really held them back. Southern Cal game, they didn't run the ball fantastic, 3.8 yards per carry. But outside that one, that game, the UCLA game, which was uncharacteristic, and they're, just kind of got in a slump for various reasons, they've been a 5+ yard per carry team. Wisconsin was 5 yards per carry. And so overall, you feel like they could be more consistent. But, Daniel, I will turn this around again. And, I know we sometimes tend to be a little negative. You kind of have to be when you're comparing elite teams to do a good job analytically. We could do the ESPN thing and just talk about how great you both are and talk about why you're both going to win the game 100 points at the same time. Not who we are as a channel, also not necessarily the best analysis we could give. Wisconsin's not a great run defense, and I think that's something that's flown under the radar. Even in that game, which, Penn State did win in the end pretty handily. We've talked about it before, that Wisconsin had some major issues at the defensive line going into the season. They had injuries at that position in fall camp. Right now, they're 55th in our rankings in run defense, 20th in pass defense. I think the pass defense is the thing that gives Penn State the most fits. So you end up with this philosophical difference of a Penn State offense that I think is probably better at consistently running the ball, and an Ohio State offense that is better at being explosive when they can be. But again, in that Nebraska game, they didn't have any explosives rushing. The longest carry they had in the game was 15 yards from Henderson. Judkin's longest carry was only 7 yards the entire game. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to who has the explosives, because both these teams are capable of having their explosives. And Daniel, we talk about this a lot. When scores get to the mid-20s and below, it kind of becomes everybody's game, because it's about who has one bad run fit, who has one bad coverage fit. And I keep harping on this all year, and I'm going to again. I think a lot of the parity discussions that are going on right now, people point to NIL and the transfer portal. Look, NIU isn't suddenly on par with Notre Dame because of the transfer portal. And I've seen Notre Dame play the rest of their schedule, and I've seen NIU play the rest of their schedule. NIU's been trash. Notre Dame's been really good. Why did NIU beat Notre Dame? And I think the answer is because of scheme changes, the fact that defenses have caught up. If you hit on a few big plays in a game, given that we're in a world where you can hold an elite below 40 points now, it becomes possible, if you're hot, if they screw up enough times, that you can get 14, 20 easy points in a game and win. If you're Vanderbilt playing Alabama and you're hot offensively in a game where there were only 8 possessions and Alabama opens with a pick 6, you can beat Alabama as Vanderbilt. And that whole triple option, veer option mindset that the teams have had to deal with for a while has become more realistic. And especially in a low-scoring game, it becomes anybody's ballgame, for sure, in that sort of an environment. And Daniel, do you mind if let's go ahead and get in the model, because then we can talk a little bit about stats, and I can let you sort of comment on those figures if that works for you.
Do it. Do it.
So the model in this game, it's interesting because it favors Ohio State more, but 27-11 Ohio State over Penn State. But I looked at the over-under too after it sort of figured out where it was at on this video. The over-under right now is sitting at 47. Now we're at 37. And if you work it out, it's basically saying it thinks Penn State's going to score about 10 more points than this is projecting. And then you come out with about the right result. About 3.5, 47 to Ohio State, 47-point over-under. And I think the yardage differential is interesting here because it's 6 yards per play to Ohio State to only 4.4 for Penn State. It actually thinks Penn State will throw the ball better than Ohio State at 8 yards per attempt to 7. But it thinks Ohio State's going to run the ball much better at 5 yards per carry to 2.6 for Penn State. So when we do our little unit breakdown based on our relative performance of the teams, Ohio State has 30% plus edges in rushing offense and rushing defense, but Ohio State has just about dead even in terms of passing offense. And then Penn State's passing offense actually has a slight advantage. Our model doesn't really love Ohio State's pass defense, interestingly. Thinks it's good, but not necessarily just world-stoppingly elite. So when you put all that together, Daniel, I will say the score's low, but if Penn State really is throwing for 8 yards per attempt, that's a pretty good number. 7.5 is competent, 8.5 is good. That's enough yardage, I would say, to score more than 11 points in most games. So I can totally get sort of putting it together with the model and the yardage projection where you could see this being something more like a 27-21 type game on average from a modeling Vegas projection standpoint.
I agree with that. I think if Penn State throws for 8 yards an attempt, and they're able to run it just competently, not even well, just competently, they'll get into those mid-20s. I'm curious what, like I said earlier, that I think that Ohio State's going to figure out some things offensively. But I also wonder defensively if they're going to, I feel like they have an advantage in that they've played a game against a team that's good enough to expose their good defense. And that means they've gotten a lot of learning opportunities out of that. Penn State hasn't had that opportunity yet. Like, I know they gave up 27 at Bowling Green or whatever, but Penn State hasn't played that elite tier team yet to work out all of those issues. So I think that Penn State out of this game is going to be a lot better because they're going to learn some stuff. But I think Ohio State, having played and lost that game to Oregon, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is going to have some things put together. I'm going to pick this game, but I'm going to pick it as if Drew Allar's playing. I still think he's the better quarterback for this game. I know that you like to back up a little more in what we saw Saturday, but I think over the course of a whole game against a team like Ohio State, you want the guy that's been around the block before. I think Drew Allar is going to have a decent game this time. Maybe better than I would normally think, but I think that Ohio State, having played Oregon and learned some lessons there, and gotten that 1 week of issues offensive line wise out of their system. Give me OSU 27. Give me, 3.5? Let's make them cover. Give me 27-20. Ohio State.
Yeah, I probably agree with you that overall Allar's probably the better quarterback. I just thought Prabula looked better in that game, which was interesting, and I think there's maybe some upside. I also think I'm with you. This is not the game where you want to be having your first real start. The big thing to me, though, Daniel, is when you look at Penn State and what they've done, they've leaned on Tyler Warren a lot, who's been a phenomenal football player for them. I don't know that he's quite Brock Bowers, who's been... the term generational is thrown around way too much. Jeremiah Smith may be generational, and I say that because of how much that term's thrown around. Brock Bowers was generational. Tyler Warren is kind of bordering on that, though. With what he's able to do with his build, he's a unique player that can be used in so many different ways. The problem I see, though, is that Ohio State has Cody Simon and they have JT Tuimoloau. I mean, they've got guys that can erase people in a way that no one Penn State has played can do. And, I mean, JTT, last time these two teams played, basically won the game by himself, and it took a while to get there. I also think with guys like that, when you throw in, guys like Caleb Downs, they have enough people that they can erase Warren, and they can take the backs and make Penn State try to play him straight up with the receiving core. And, Daniel, I don't think Penn State has the athletes that if a team can actually deal with Warren and those accessories that they can make you pay. And on the other side, to your point, Penn State has not played anyone offensively that can strain them the way Ohio State's going to be able to do because of their depth at the skill positions, which this year is second to none. I actually like Ohio State big in this game. I'm going to take them 34-17. I may be proven completely wrong. If so, you can feel free to call me a fool. I just think the impact players, skill players that Ohio State have on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball are going to be too much. And I get, Penn State certainly has their own versions of those guys, and Penn State's going to give them issues. But I don't know if it's enough, right? Like, I don't know that Abdul Carter by himself can win the game, even with Ohio State's issues at offensive line, which it could cripple Ohio State. This could turn into a rock fight. But you always ask me this, Daniel, so I'm going to go ahead and preemptively tell you, I think if this is a really, really low-scoring game, I do think there's a really good chance Penn State will win because of the discussion about consistency of the run game. And because I think if you get in that kind of game, I don't really love Ohio State playing a game like that because it probably also means that they're getting really disruptive by pass rush and whatnot. And I don't think they're going to be comfortable, and I think they're going to press. But I just don't think they end up in that kind of game, and I don't think Penn State's going to be really comfortable playing a team that can really get in the 30s plus and have a defense that is much better than USC's and much more likely to make them pay if they're in that situation. Because remember, when they came back on USC, I mean, the big scorer that pulled them ahead, they dumped the ball off to the running back that had escaped out to the sideline. I don't think Ohio State's going to let them do that. I think they're going to have to make them earn it with the receiving core. And I don't know that Penn State just has the athletes to do it, honestly. I just, at least so far this season, I haven't been able to see that. And again, even that Wisconsin game, which was close for a while, I come back to the fact that was still a really bad run defense. And I think Ohio State's run defense, which right now is really, really good, if not elite, I think that's the thing that's gonna decide this football game. And yeah, Ohio State's number 3 in run defense overall, and then in our model, opponent adjusted, they're number 1. And I'll say Nebraska is currently number 6, which explains why Ohio State had so many issues. I just don't like Penn State playing the best run defense in the country with their balance of offensive skill talent and what that's going to mean for how they want to construct an offense.
To me, it really comes down to the fact that Ohio State has been tested more and played better quality on average. I just, it's hard to get away from that for me mentally. I do think that there is an adjustment period when you've been able to be on pretty low stakes cruise control for your schedule. And I don't think Penn State's schedule is their schedule is not like Indiana's schedule, but there are scaling issues you run into when you play an elite team. And it takes a while to figure out what works and what doesn't work. I think Chip Kelly's figured out what's happened last week. He'll have them ready this Saturday. But I agree with you. If it's at a low-scoring game, give me the home team. And we'll see. All right, y'all. Let us know what you think about this game and who's going to win. And maybe caveat it with if Drew Allar plays and if he doesn't play. What do those scores look like? Is there an avenue for Penn State maybe to get this win? Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.